trigger warnings can be triggering.
The heated debate surrounding trigger warnings.
Romeo and Juliet, it comes with a trigger warning?
It says, production contains suicide and violence. Well, spoiler alert. The research indicates that trigger warnings are not effective.
Trigger warnings don't hurt.
Oh, actually, they do.
Wouldn't it be simple to just say heads up, right?
But it's not right. It's not going to happen in the real world. This has gone way too far. I have a warning. There is a huge ideological movement attempting to sweep our nation. It is more than unhealthy, it's toxic. Based on fiction and lies and targeting you, your family, and eating away at the very heart of what has made America the subject of worldwide envy for generations. This ideology strives to undermine America's meritocracy and other core defining values by contaminating messaging in our educational systems, corporations, certain brands marketed to you, the media you watch or click to consume. It is an ideology that seeks to undermine drive, ambition, self-worth, and pride by replacing it with a commitment to equality of outcome, regardless of quality of input. Now, tonight, I will unfold a glaring example of how fringe activists, through what I call the tyranny of the fringe, have altered the very basis of preparing our younger generation for the next level of life. I believe the future of our country could very well hang in the balance, and every one of us are stakeholders. Tonight's example may seem small at first, but by the time we're done, I believe you will see how it is symptomatic of a systemic decay we must work together to overcome. What if I told you there was a theater that had a special room, a special space for audience members who felt triggered during a play? Or that a classic novel warns students about their description of spiders and insects? Trigger warnings, which first appeared in the early 2000s and were designed to protect people at risk of experiencing PTSD, now seem to be requested seemingly everywhere and for almost everything. Tonight, we take a deep dive into the heated debate surrounding trigger warnings. Now, what does this signal? What could be the possible problem with alerting someone to some unpleasantness around the corner? Well, you're soon going to know the answer to that question. Senior news anchor for Merit Street Media, Chris Gutierrez, investigated how these warnings were permeating our country. Take a look.
Dr. Phil, while no one is trying to minimize the value, multiple studies do suggest that trigger warnings potentially do more harm than good. And now critics argue that trigger warnings like this one right here have evolved into a catch-all phrase to protect companies grappling with heightened legal anxiety. The question is, to what end?
I must issue you a trigger warning.
You can't escape them.
If you're in doubt of whether you should give a trigger warning or not, always do.
Trigger warnings are everywhere.
Trigger warnings.
Trigger warnings.
It's even a hot topic on YouTube.
Everything about trigger warnings is really meant with the best of intentions.
A study performed by a clinical psychologist at Harvard suggests trigger warnings did not help trauma survivors brace themselves to face potentially upsetting content. In some cases, they made things worse. Another researcher added the reason people don't get over their phobias and traumas and fears is because they don't allow themselves to be exposed to reminders. A man in Kentucky sued his employer and won $450,000 after his colleagues threw him a birthday party. He warned them that a party would cause him stress and anxiety. They mocked him, but no one's laughing now.
And if you thought it was okay for companies to promote Mother's Day or Father's Day online, well, guess again. Chris discovered that could be triggering.
Look what Levi sent customers ahead of Mother's Day. They acknowledged that Mother's Day could be triggering and gave customers the option to opt out of their promotions. Kay Jewelers did the same, adding Mother's Day can be a challenging time. Even DoorDash recognized the trigger and posted Mother's Day may be a difficult time for some.
That was a trigger warning.
Intense backlash surrounds the popular Netflix show 13 Reasons Why. The controversial series depicts teen suicide.
Well, please welcome Chris Gutierrez, senior news anchor for Merritt Street Media. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
It's a big problem because I think it's symptomatic of a mindset of coddling people and not preparing them for the next level of life. So what did you find out when you were digging into all this?
It's something that you've pointed out clearly. Part of getting through something is you don't tiptoe around an issue or a subject or a trauma, right? You get through that not by avoiding something. So when you avoid something, experts will tell you you're doing yourself a disservice because you never find yourself on the other side of that by ignoring what happened. Instead, you get that help through therapy and through counseling. It's like you go to the gym and you work out your body, right, Dr. Phil? At the same time, you want to work out your mind. You got to get things off of your mind so you can see the other side, you can get through it. You do that through counseling and through therapy, not by avoiding it or tiptoeing around it.
Well, of course. What stood out to you most during your investigation?
One thing I should point out is that when it comes to these trigger warnings, the experts will say that they're not specific enough in a general setting. The one that really stuck out to me is in London, Romeo and Juliet. Did you know at the Globe Theater, it comes with a trigger warning?
Yeah, and it's interesting what it says. I mean, let's take a look at this. Globe Theater, London. Upsetting Romeo and Juliet. Production contains suicide, violence, reference to drug use, gunshot sound effects, and stage blood. Provides helpline after show.
Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, so what it says here is production contains suicide and violence. Well, spoiler alert. In case you didn't know, somebody commits suicide in here, and this is about two people.
Right.
One of them's going to kill themselves.
You know, the more I think about it, as a dad, you talked about coddling, right? I let my kids fail, and it's hard, right? But what I'm doing, I hope, is I'm building resiliency within them, that they know they can pick themselves back up, and whatever that issue is that they're dealing with doesn't define them. That's not who they are.
If you hover over your children, if you keep people from experiencing stress, strain, a degree of anxiety, they're never going to learn. And it's not just that trigger warnings don't work, which they don't. It's that trigger warnings have been shown to create the very anxiety, the very panic, the very things that they're trying to protect the person from.
Right.
And depending on what resources you look at, 50 to 75% of universities use these, and they have access to the same research that I have access to, which means they know they don't work. So why are they using them anyway? Because they're virtue signaling. And to me, that seems incredibly hypocritical to do something they know does not work, knows does not teach coping skills, knows does not prepare and toughen up the person for the next level of life.
Resiliency is what I'm trying to build in my kids.
Yeah,
personally.
well, you don't do that by not letting them ever scrape a knee, not ever letting them experience something that gives them some degree of upset. Thanks for doing that piece.
Got it.
We needed that. Coming up, an Ivy League student who says it's negligent for a professor to not warn students about traumatic material in class. We'll talk to her next. Your body is a system, and when it's running right, you feel focused, energized, in flow, but sometimes we struggle to find that flow state. Why? Because there's too much static in our system, brain fog, fatigue, and inflammation. The Echo Flask clears the static by infusing your water with molecular hydrogen, a natural science-backed gas that helps your body think sharper, recover faster, and run smoother. This is more than hydration. It's better focus, more energy, faster recovery, less internal stress, and longer-term benefits that keep you sharp. When your water works harder, your whole system does too. Find your flow state with the Echo Flask hydrogen water bottle and get an unlimited supply of hydrogen water at home and on the go. Visit echowater.com/Phil and use code Phil for 10% off. That's echowater.com/Phil. Enter code Phil to save 10%. Let's discuss preparedness because we know emergencies happen when we least expect them, but instead of just taking it, we can prepare. Let's discuss Jase Case, one of your most important preparation tools. With Jase Case, you'll have emergency prescription medications on hand right when you need them. Think about it. Ever been caught off guard, whether it's a sudden illness or a travel hiccup? The right medications can make all the difference. Jase Case is designed to take that worry off your plate. So when a minor health issue pops up, it doesn't turn into a major problem. Don't let unforeseen circumstances derail your plans or your peace of mind. Live with confidence. Take charge with Jase today. Visit jase.com and use code PHIL for a discount on your order and get emergency antibiotics on hand for the moment you need them. That's jase.com, code PHIL, PHIL.
Trigger warning. This episode contains information on how trigger warnings can be triggering.
Content warning, I have a bloody nose.
I have trichotillomania. With this condition, my hair pains me to grow back in.
Okay, now I'm gonna floss. Trigger warning.
So think twice before you say trigger warning.
Well, tonight we're discussing trigger warnings, which I talk about in my new book, We've Got Issues, how you can stand strong for America's soul and sanity. I use an example from Cornell University about a resolution the Student Assembly tried to pass to mandate trigger warnings. It got rejected. But the co-author, Claire, gave us an inside look at why some Ivy Leaguers are so passionate about being prepared for difficult content.
Hi, Dr. Phil. This is Claire Ting, and today we're on the campus of Cornell University. It's clear that the debate about trigger warnings is far from over, so today we're going to get some thoughts from the students on campus.
The trigger warnings that people really care about: racial violence, slavery, pedophilia,
Mobbings and lynchings, domestic violence, sexual assault, relationship abuse, yelling. If someone's experienced that as a child, words of warning are helpful.
Teachers are able to still teach what they want to teach, just with a caveat of saying that this could be sensitive to others.
If you've gone through sexual assault, obviously you should get a heads up, because those mental emotions and feelings can absolutely manifest into physical symptoms and even hospitalization, which is something I don't think the older generation understands. We as Gen Z, we've prioritized mental health so much more.
We've been subject to trauma. The trigger warnings, this is more an act of love, a small thing we can do that eases pain for people in a very, very hurtful world.
Thank you so much.
Well, Claire, you think failure to give a content warning if there's something in a course that could be upsetting is actually negligent and unethical?
I think it's a lot more complicated than that. There is no one set definition of what a trigger warning is, right? The research that we have right now dates all the way back from 1985 to 2023. There's no one standard definition of what a trigger warning is. But in order for one to work, whatever form it might take, it takes two things. And that's mutual respect and radical self-responsibility. It's your responsibility to cope with your own trauma. It might not have been your fault that it happened, but it is your responsibility to take care of it.
What does that have to do with someone giving or not giving a trigger warning, whatever you define trigger warning to be?
Isn't the whole point of a trigger warning, right, that the content ahead might activate some trauma?
Well, I don't think there is a point to a trigger warning. That's my point. Because regardless of what you think, the research indicates that trigger warnings, however broadly you define them, are not effective. Look, I'm as sensitive and compassionate to people's reactions as I think you can be. It's what I do. And I don't want to create anyone unnecessary discomfort. What I want to do is prepare people to function better tomorrow than they did today. And if I create an environment where they can avoid learning to cope with what life is going to throw at them, then I am cheating them miserably.
Referencing back to some of the studies that you mentioned, many sources claim that trigger warnings don't work. A more accurate interpretation of that study would more so be that trigger warnings don't hurt.
Well, actually, they do.
Right, and that's because the study that indicates that they do, right? It says it's because of this anticipatory effect that a trigger warning causes. If you're a survivor of abuse, and I tell you, Dr. Phil, this movie might have some abuse scenes, it would be perfectly reasonable for you to have a temporary anxious effect. And that's the harm and the research references.
No, that's a very simplistic view. The point is that if you react to that and therefore avoid the content, then you're not learning to cope with it. Whereas if you continue to interact with it, you learn to be desensitized to it. You may even immerse yourself. In fact, there are evidence-based therapies that indicate that if you go through systematic desensitization, if you go through immersion therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, if you go through any manner of constant exposure to that which creates an autonomic response on your behalf, then that response will diminish and you will no longer be a prisoner to that. And when we have this list of content that gets so broad that literature itself becomes triggering, then that person becomes so siloed in life that they simply can't function because you're not going to get those warnings when you go into the real world. We've got to take a break. Coming up, professors from prestigious universities on both sides of the trigger warning debate will join us next.
I went to open my textbook. There was an image of a young Chinese man with a rope around his neck, hung, dead, just laying there. There was no warning from the professor that that imagery would be used. Not only is it a photo of murder and a photo of death, it's also a racially charged murder and death. And I think that could absolutely be triggering for people with PTSD in certain areas, for sure.
No, not for sure. Not for sure. Is it pleasant? Of course it's not pleasant. Would anybody like to dwell on that or look at it? No. Is it part of life? Yes, it is part of life, and that's the point. That was a student from Cornell University in favor of trigger warnings. She says the older generation just doesn't get it. So we're going to add some older folks besides me to the debate. Todd, a professor at George Mason University, and Connor, a professor at the University of Chicago, have opposite views on how to handle difficult content in the classroom.
We don't need trigger warnings in the classroom.
We ought to have trigger warnings for really any topic that might be depicting human suffering.
The results of having trigger warnings in the classrooms are students are becoming more fragile, have greater difficulty managing their emotions, and they're less skilled at navigating conflict.
This generation of college students are anything but snowflakes. They are resilient.
Trigger warnings don't prepare students for some of the inevitable things. In the real world, you want people to be prepared to deal with difficulties effectively.
Trigger warnings do not shelter people from difficult ideas. It empowers people through having a conversation about how the best way to wrestle with those ideas so they can actually make a difference.
There is a problem with trigger warnings impeding free speech. Teachers and students are less likely to bring up difficult topics.
The idea that trigger warnings stifle speech is exactly wrong. A warning doesn't necessitate anything else other than inviting people to have a conversation. By inviting students to reach out to you to figure out how best to approach a topic, you're encouraging speech.
You don't need trigger warnings as an intervention to improve students' lives. They're a good short-term solution. You avoid, you hide, and you feel better. The problem is, by itself, it impedes your ability to handle this current stressor and future stressors.
If you're handling your own books or have a bookkeeper, you're risking inaccuracies, missed deductions, and blind spots in cash flow. Financial Yield Solutions, Inc., known as FYSI, has a seasoned team of accounting professionals and attorneys that handle every journal entry, bank reconciliation, and month-end close. They deliver clear and timely financial reports so you can stay in control. Plus, their advanced tax avoidance strategies can help you capture every deduction before you file. You'll even get plugged into their network of industry leaders and referred partners for real-world growth opportunities. Set up your free consultation to learn how FYSI's experts will transform your books into a growth engine and accelerate your business to the next level. Act now to claim your free $5,000 business assessment. Available only for a limited time. Visit fysi.com/Dr. Phil and use promo code Dr. Phil or call 800-877-4000 today. Have you heard about the so-called silent tax? It could be the biggest threat to your savings in 2025. I'm talking about inflation, out-of-control prices, a shrinking dollar, and less buying power for hardworking people like you. I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. What are you going to do to protect what's yours? Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free Precious Metals Guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil, that's DRPHIL, to 50505 today. Thanks for joining us. Todd, let me ask you first, where do you come down on this?
Well, I'm glad you guys are talking about the behavioral evidence, which I think is important. And the research is really clear. Trigger warnings don't really affect your emotions for whatever's going to come next. It affects that anticipatory anxiety. But there's a missing piece that hasn't been discussed. When you get this anticipatory anxiety before you read a book, watch a play, watch a movie, you're so hyper-focused on your own symptoms and your own distress that you get to this problem, which is this. Our goal as educators or artists or anyone that's trying to deliver content is to build a sense of agency in people, build people's ability to tolerate distress so they can pursue the goals that are meaningful to them despite whatever emotions arise. What we don't want is a bunch of people that stop what they're doing because they're afraid to feel anxiety, they're afraid to get angry, they're afraid to be embarrassed, and so they don't take risks.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because whether it's the reaction to the warning of what's coming up or a reaction to the content when it comes up, and you have an uncomfortable reaction, why is that necessarily a bad thing? I'm glad you brought that up because whether it's the reaction to the warning of what's coming up or a reaction to the content when it comes up, and you have an uncomfortable reaction, why is that necessarily a bad thing?
Sometimes it's exactly what you want. So as you were talking about Romeo and Juliet before, the goal isn't to feel good and tranquil and excited. The goal is you're going through the arc of a very complicated emotional love story where the world isn't on their sides. And so what the artist, Shakespeare, and everyone who's interpreting Shakespeare is trying to do is get you to develop your emotional intelligence, improve your perspective taking through artistry.
I think you observe yourself deal with it, therefore make an attribution to yourself that, hey, I saw that, it wasn't pleasant, I dealt with that, and I can attribute to myself the ability to deal with that and get past it. What's your thought?
When there's sort of passive disclaimers you put on top of a syllabus, you put before something on a YouTube video or whatever, you sort of wash your hands to absolve yourself of liability. Using them too voluminously is like saying, you know, if you can drink 60 gallons of water and that will kill you, therefore we should just ban people from drinking water. Instead, if trigger warnings, when being an active opportunity to have a conversation with students, regardless of what the topic was, if they're not sure how to approach the topic, invite them to have a conversation with you, so that way you can help them work through it to the extent that it's in something, in fact, where they can't do it alone. Because we're teaching on colleges, 23% of college students are food insecure, 25% of college-age women will experience sexual violence while in college, 8% of college students will be homeless at least one day during a month. And so inviting them to have that conversation can be an opportunity to connect them with resources on campus so they don't fall through the cracks. And in doing this for almost a decade, I've never once had to change anything that I've assigned.
I love the motivation behind this. To me, when I hear the evidence of you haven't had to change anything in 10 years because the conversations are present, tells me that maybe the conversations aren't happening. I would suggest an alternative. Set up in the beginning is, this is going to be the culture of our classroom or our workplace. And you provide rules of engagement or how we're going to have productive conflict, such that a student can talk to you about, you know what, I don't like the way you're talking about food insecurity. I feel as if your experience, your privilege is getting in the way from you understanding what my experience is. It's about not having ad hominems, which is we're going to focus on the ideas, not the person. The idea that the only dangerous thing is the idea that there are dangerous questions you can ask, as long as it comes from a place of curiosity. And then you have the likability principle, which is when we have discussions with people, we tend to give a different standard for people that we like versus people that are on maybe the other political aisle for who we are. And then I have students discuss which principles are the hardest for you. They have conversations with me, and from that, any time that a conflict arises or doesn't arise, I can refer back to our culture is we're going to discuss all the things that are difficult in society because you come to college not to be people that look like you, not to be around people that think like you. You don't need to spend $50,000 a year unless you're going to be exposed to different ideas, different opinions. And so if we're not having conflict, we're not doing our job, and this class isn't working.
I am entirely in favor of what you're suggesting. I think a vigorous debate in the classroom is essential for learning. So let me give you an example. I've taught lessons on homelessness policy. We've gone through ethnographic kind of boots on the ground studies. I say, here's what's coming up in our next class. If you're not sure how to approach it, like I would for any topic, right? Come talk to me after class, stop by office hours, send me an email. And so I had a student who says, this topic's hit me a little close to home. I said, okay, and so we came to my office, they tell me why. And so we're talking about it in terms, they're actually dealing with homelessness themselves. And so because of that conversation, by inviting people to have a conversation, we're promoting speech, we're promoting the sharing of ideas and perspective. I was able to connect them with financial aid resources so that they got out of that circumstance. That lesson, after I talked to them at the end of the term, was their favorite. So something that otherwise they might have just tuned out of, they actually felt more encouraged, and by having that, I could build the one-on-one individual instruction with them so they succeeded.
Yeah. Now, Claire, you proposed a resolution to require faculty to provide trigger warnings about traumatic content that can be presented in class, including but not limited to sexual assault, domestic violence, self-harm, suicide, child abuse, racial hate crimes, transphobic violence, homophobic harassment, xenophobia, and other things, right? Mm-hmm. And what was the response?
We passed the resolution through the student assembly. It received a unanimous vote. It was sent to the administration, who then vetoed it on the grounds of it being a mandate.
Okay, so administration said no.
On the grounds that because we asked for a mandate, yes.
Okay. They said we can't accept the resolution as actions it recommends infringe on core commitment to academic freedom and freedom of inquiry.
So if we dive a little bit deeper into that administrator's response, we'll actually find that it was because of the mandate policy mechanism that would create a chilling effect. Although the authors of that response do acknowledge that there can be a form of courtesy and even compassion that can come from a trigger warning in the classroom, especially as it pertains to extreme topics like child abuse, sexual violence, domestic violence, etc.
Okay. What do you want to say?
So Claire and Connor, both of them are capturing this beautifully. What I'm suggesting is, based on evidence, there's a better way of doing this. As a clinical psychologist, I spent 4 years treating sexual assault survivors, most under the age of 11. And so I've had survivors that are with me where this are their triggers: green carpet, light bulbs, furniture that's unadorned. And so if you take all of the hundreds of thousands of people that are sexual assault survivors and made that the list in terms of what triggers are, it would just be biblical in terms of size. And so as opposed to trying to get at everything that can bother someone, miscarriages, abortion, race-related conversations that happen there, what I would suggest is you create a classroom that starts with a combination of compassion, personal agency, and I'm gonna treat you as if you are not fragile and you could handle difficult conversations. And if you need emotion regulation training, that will be the undercurrent of whatever subject we're talking about.
Yeah, because you can't identify the triggers. Even with PTSD, you can't know. It can be a smell, it can be a sound, it can be any number of things. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about some trigger words that may surprise you, because one of the points I make is this has gone way too far. We'll be right back. The next time you gather with family, enjoy Balance of Nature supplements as an addition to your favorite dishes. Our veggie supplement, made from 15 ingredients like garlic, onion, and cayenne pepper, can easily be opened and added to your favorite dishes like homemade soups or dips. Not to mention our fruits supplement, which is made from 16 ingredients like banana, strawberries, and mango, making it a great addition to your homemade smoothies. Start your journey with Balance of Nature. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com to get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first preferred set as a new preferred customer with free shipping and our money-back guarantee. Go to balanceofnature.com or call 1-800-246-8751 and get this special offer by using discount code Dr. Phil. That's DRPHIL.
I wanted to talk about trigger warnings. I wanted to also go into the pandemic. They created an environment where these children no longer have coping skills. They dumped a bunch of money into these things that the schools were allowed to implement, including wellness centers, where the kids can now go if they feel triggered. You are teaching them through these trigger warnings that they are no longer allowed to cope. What in the world are we teaching in schools that you need a trigger warning? We need critical young minds that are able to cope with things without being completely triggered to where they have to run away into a room and hide.
There's a substantial body of evidence that says trigger warnings just don't have the desired effect. They don't work. They don't help build the students' resiliency. They don't help build the employees' resiliency. And I got two big problems with it. One is it's just gone too far. I did a collection of some of the trigger warnings that have been brought up in college and organizations. Divorce, diets, death penalty, drug use, driving, weight, racism, gun violence, homophobia, victim blaming, body shaming, abuse, surgery, skulls, skeletons, needles, kidnapping, dental trauma, spiders, insects, snakes, vomit, pregnancy, childbirth, blood, mental illness. You can just keep going, and it's to the point where something triggers everybody. Major corporations are sending around memos about let's not promote Mother's Day because some people don't have mothers. Why rub their nose in it? Or maybe they lost their mother. Why remind them of that? Well, a lot of people do. And if they're in grief, it's not that they don't know other people still have their mothers. They didn't all die on the same day. It's an insult to people, and I'm concerned that we are underestimating people and we're not giving them a chance to observe themselves to say, well, that was not fun, but you know what? I got through it. I observed myself cope with that, and I'm proud of that, and I won't be so afraid of it next time. Is that a fair statement?
There's no question. But there's another piece, which is parents often assume that children can't handle things that they actually can handle. They underestimate, as you're saying, their intellectual and emotional ability. And when they see the list is long Let's not see that movie. Let's go look for the easiest, simplest Disney movie possible. When yet, that kid can see a PG movie because it's about baseball and they love baseball and there's bowling in that movie and there's racial difficulties in conversation in that movie. But guess what? A good parent will watch that movie, discuss it with them, and that conversation is what elucidates them developing milestones before their time.
All right, coming up, should there be trigger warnings for theater productions, art exhibits, novels? We'll talk about that when we come back. My next guest, Kevin, executive director of the Dallas Theater Center, says as a theater artist, he would like audiences to experience all the complicated feelings of a production without a warning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Do you want people to experience these things with some degree of spontaneity rather than brace themselves for everything and lose some of the element of the experiential aspect of kind of losing themselves into production?
Yeah, one of the things I think is so empowering and thrilling about experiencing a live play is that you get to go on a journey, a complicated emotional journey in which bad things happen, things you may not fully understand or agree with, things that can bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings. And you're doing that in a safe space because, of course, in a theater, it's not really happening. So that safe space allows an audience to have the opportunity to work through thoughts and ideas that is ultimately enriching.
Yeah, we'll be watching something sometimes, and Robin, she'll say out loud, it's just a movie, to create that distance from it. And that's a coping mechanism, right?
Yeah, yes, and when we first started with trigger warnings, it was connected to physical concerns. So, for instance, a strobe light could cause somebody who is epileptic to have a seizure. So it makes sense to warn people of a physical trigger that could cause harm to themselves or others. Now what we're seeing is an expansion of that to say, I don't want to encounter thoughts, feelings, ideas, experiences that could give me emotional distress. I actually think that's not only bad for the experience of art, which you want to have all those mixed up together, but I also think it's a challenge for our country as a whole and for the democracy, because I think over time, folks could use trigger warnings as a way to avoid encountering stories, characters, themes that might initially make them uncomfortable. And over time, that could cause us greater separation from each other, as well as a lack of understanding of ourselves.
Well, that's one of the things I'm concerned about is, are we not experiencing enough things to toughen up a young generation to get into the real world where they're not going to have the benefit of these trigger warnings. They're not going to have learned coping skills by experience or exposure. I've employed as many as 1,000 people at one time, a lot of them really young people in the entertainment industry. And there was a time when I've said if I had two people that were perfectly matched in every way, except one had a college degree and the other did not, I would tend to hire the person with a college degree. I would do that because I knew something about this person I didn't know about that one. They could set a long-term goal and keep it. They could meet deadlines. They could work as a group. And maybe this person could too, but I did know it about this person. I don't know that anymore because too much of curriculum is being bent around the student. Complaints are being made about professors and what they're saying to students to offend them. And when I look at things like this, I really wonder if we're cheating the student. Do you agree that learning to cope is better than avoiding?
I think so. I don't think that giving a trigger warning necessarily precludes a student from experiencing this difficult content and learning to cope with it, right? And we have to learn that. We can't just avoid that. But we can also do that in a way that's compassionate and understanding. Wouldn't it be, simple to just say, heads up, right? This is pretty difficult content coming up.
Why?
Just so they're aware, right? I mean,
well, no, not right. You keep saying right, but it's not right. That's not going to happen in the real world because it's not going to happen in the real world.
I feel very, very sad that my generation is given this privilege to understand mental health, awareness, the ways it manifested, and that's a privilege not afforded to those who came before me.
I feel very sad that you don't get the fact that when you get into the real world and get to competing for jobs and dealing with people that didn't go to your college and they're doing the things that they do to get ahead in life and take your job from you and do the things that they have to do to get ahead, that they're not going to come to you and say, heads up, I'm getting ready to go talk really bad about you to your employer.
Things can happen, right?
And
we're still going to learn how to code.
You're supposed to learn while you're in college so you're ready. That's what you're spending all that money for. And one of the lessons can be how to cope. We got to take a break. My final thoughts when we come back. There's a certain set of expectations in any environment you enter, and they differ. I mean, if you go to get a massage, that's different than if you go to basic training in the Army. Okay, there's a different set of expectations for one versus the other. If you're taking a class on a certain period of literature, and it's Greek tragedy, you have a pretty good idea somebody's going to get stabbed, okay? And if you've got a problem with people getting stabbed because your neighbor was stabbed and you saw it and that's really raw with you, might not be a good time to take that course. You might want to go take cooking or something. Well, that's got knives in it. You don't want to do that. But you've got to come in with a certain set of expectations. And so you've got to prepare yourself for that. And you shouldn't bend the curriculum around some student that has that particular issue. If they're not equipped to cope with that, if they have a mental illness that I'm very compassionate with, then maybe they need to deal with that before they do this. But look, as you point out, we don't know what all the stimuli are that can set someone off, even if they have a PTSD. And that can be very neurological as well as psychological. There are things out there, and if we build our coping skills and we observe ourselves coping, then our attributions to ourselves are like, hey, we know how to deal with this. I feel like we should put a big sign on the building that says, trigger warning, Dr. Phil's in this building. It's all you need to know. Dr. Phil's in this building. Something's going to come up. So you should know that. Have we talked about things today that has had an emotional impact on you? If it is today, raise your hand. Everybody here, we're talking about real people with real challenges. Everybody in here raise their hands, because we're dealing with real life and real solutions. I'm glad you came and talked about this today, and I wasn't triggered at all by anything that you said, even though we disagree. And I thought a really good point that you brought up, even though I think we disagree on thresholds, is that you use it to route people towards resources. That's a great thing to do. I don't think it needs to happen in that order, but whenever you see it, you route people to resources, and we need more of that, and I know you do the same thing. So I think that's a use rather than misuse of that information if someone has that response. So I'm glad that that's going on. I wish more people would do that instead of just turn a deaf ear. We're out of time. Thanks so much to all of my guests tonight, and thank you so much at home for finding us here on Merit Street Media. We are a destination network for the entire family. We do delve into important discussions here about core values in your family and in the collective personality of this entire country throughout the day. You don't have to wonder about that. And you can also pick up my new book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. It's everywhere books are sold. We'll see you next time. Thank you.